We might make a start. So you're all very welcome this afternoon. My name is Peter Gray. I'm the director of the Institute of Irish Studies, and it's my great pleasure to welcome you all here on behalf of the University and the Institute to this year's International Irish Studies Lecture. The Institute of Irish Studies at Queen's was founded back in 1965 by Professor Emma Eston Evans to encourage interest and to promote and coordinate research in those fields of studies which have particular Irish interest. It was one of the first interdisciplinary centres focusing on the culture, history, landscape and society of Ireland to be established anywhere in the world. And since its inception more than 50 years ago now, it has attracted scholars from such wide-ranging fields as archaeology, art, literature, geography, history, Irish language, law, political science, anthropology, economics and sociology. The genuinely interdisciplinary nature of the Institute has proved a major strength. The combination of experience and background resulting from the wealth of experience of its fellows provides a stimulating working environment and often leading scholars to develop new approaches in their research and publications. And the Institute hosts an annual International Irish Studies lecture given by a distinguished academic or figure in public service. Previous lecturers have included Professor Pat Palmer from Maynooth, Professor David Lloyd from the University of California, Riverside, Professor Richard Carney of Boston College, Professor Joe Lee of New York University, Professor Joop Leersen of the University of Amsterdam, and Professor Elizabeth Malcolm of the University of Melbourne. And it's with great pleasure that we're able to welcome in person this year, after several years of delay arising from the COVID pandemic, a leading public figure who has played a prominent role within his profession as a lawyer, as a public servant through a number of national and international leadership roles, and as a political agent whose interests have spanned the Atlantic and had a significant impact here in Northern Ireland. Brian O'Dwyer is off counsel with O'Dwyer and Bernstein, a law firm in New York City that concentrates on personal injury, immigration rights, labour relations, disability rights, and commercial litigation. As a son of Irish immigrants, he's been especially influential and active in America's Irish community, focusing on immigration rights and reform, as well as supporting investment and development throughout Ireland as chair of the Irish Chamber of Commerce USA. In 2019, he was the Grand Marshal of the New York City St. Patrick's Day Parade. He's long been involved in the Democratic Party, as a founding member of the National Democratic Ethnic Coordinating Committee and of Irish American Democrats. He was part of the delegation that accompanied President Bill Clinton to Ireland on each of his 3 trips and served as an advisor to the White House on Irish issues, including the peace process. In June 2011, Secretary of State Hillary Clinton appointed him as Commissioner of the United States National Commission for UNESCO, and he has served as International Chair of Ireland West Airport and holds honorary degrees from DCU, DPhil and Middlebury College of DHL. And in the last week, he tells me he has been named by the Governor of New York State as the incoming Chair of the State Gaming Commission. Mr. O'Dwyer has been chosen by Irish America magazine on numerous occasions as a member of the top 100 Irish in the United States. In June 2012, he was honoured as one of the top 25 Irish who have made a difference by Irish voice. The award recognised him as one of the top leaders of the Irish community in the New York area, and as someone who has had a significant positive impact in changing the community. So it's now with great pleasure that I call on Mr. Brian O'Dwyer to speak on the subject Irish America from the Troubles to Brexit, a sleeping giant awakes. Brian.
Thank you, Peter. And before I start, I'd like to just welcome a couple of people. In particular, Senator Mark Daly, my friend, who has come all the way from Kenmare. Senator Daly has done more to promote Irish America and the relationships between Irish and American groups than any single person I know. Senator Daly, you're very welcome indeed. I also want to acknowledge Dean John Feerick, John Feerick is a lion in the Irish American community, has served as the dean of Fordham Law School. And this pains me gratefully to acknowledge Fordham Law School, being that I serve in my degree comes from another, I think, far more prestigious institution of Georgetown. But John, you're very welcome. I'm honored that you're here today. And my friend Frank Costello, who lives in Belfast and was been a family friend of ours for years. I am grateful for this invitation to address this to you, the Queen's community. In fact, this is not the first time that I have had the occasion to address the community. In November of 1995, I was part of that historic journey of American President Bill Clinton. As a member of that delegation, I was privileged to speak to the students, and I came away totally impressed with the knowledge that the Queen student had of the American political scene. Now, almost 30 years later, I have the privilege of talking to you again. In doing so, I am aware that the subject I approach is both sensitive and controversial. And while I will endeavor to provide a historic overview of the topic, as befits such a scholarly institution as Queen's, I caution you that I lived through these events, so I urge you to view these remarks for what they are, an account of the past 30 years through the eyes of one intimately involved. The subject, of course, is a misnomer. Irish Americans have always been involved in Ireland and their adopted country, America. As beautifully documented by my friend Neil O'Dowd in his new book, Washington and the Irish, the backbone of the American War for Independence were Irishmen and from both traditions. That history has been largely obscured, as later American nativists were largely successful in obscuring the Irish American contribution to the campaigns that ultimately led to the victory at Georgetown. In particular, for a variety of shameful reasons, the role of Irish Presbyterians in America's fight for independence has been diminished and even eradicated. O'Dowd's work has done us all a great service, and a service to history by revealing the true nature of Irish Americans in the founding of the American nation. Of course, Irish America is intertwined with American history. During our Civil War, the contributions of the new immigrants from Ireland, particularly in fighting with the Irish regiments for the Union, is well documented. Equally true, however, and shamefully, Irish immigrant slaveholders fought and died for the Confederate States to preserve the institution of slavery. Later, Irish Americans would be heard in saving De Valera, an American-born citizen from the death penalty that was exacted on the other participants in the 1916 Rising. And they were involved in both the recognition of the Irish Free State and in supporting Irish neutrality during the Second World War, when Churchill wanted to bomb Ireland into the war. Truly, in the years afterwards, however, Irish America did seem to sleep. Massive immigration to America continued to hide the extreme poverty and lack of opportunity that existed in Ireland. This wave of Irish immigrants were busy making their new life in America, and in short order become the most important and successful immigrant groups to reach America's shores. Many, however, were ashamed of their Irish birth and concentrated on their new life in Ireland, in the United States. This continued well into the 1980s. In the meantime, in 1965, the United States enacted a new immigration bill that largely eliminated Irish immigration to the United States. As documented by Ray O'Hanlon's new book, Unintended Consequences, that law reduced legal immigration from potentially thousands per year to a mere handful. However, the Irish being the Irish, that did not stop them from coming to America. In the early 1980s, a new wave of immigrants arrived during the course of what was a recession in Ireland. This wave of new, well-educated, and young immigrants were not content with the status of being undocumented. They were basically allowed to stay in the United States by sufferance. They rejected, however, the advice of the established American leadership, including me, by the way, to leave well enough alone, and directly confronted the injustice of American immigration law. Their activism, in turn, inspired the established Irish American community to organize around that issue. They were ultimately successful in enacting various visa schemes that provided for the legalization of thousands of Irish immigrants. In the first of these schemes, the Donnelly Visa, 10,000 visas were set aside for 36 countries affected by the US law. Irish America went together as a group, and with the help of veteran broadcaster Adrian Flanley, came upon a scheme that all of the visas that were supposed to be at an American post office on a certain day, instead of being mailed, were sent to Flanley's office, and he hired a big U-Haul truck, took them all down, and dumped them at 12:01 in the morning. As a result, over half of the visas given to the 36 countries, one country got it, and that was Ireland. The government, of course, immediately changed the rules in the face of what turned out to be a great scheme by Irish America. Later, more than thousands of Irish citizens were granted visas under different schemes. I submit that that success was a turning point for Irish America. The issue of Irish immigration was a unifying force in Irish America that had truly been divided on how we would handle the troubles in the North. Many in the community, especially the established political leaders, were sympathetic to John Hume and the SDLP, while others, among the rank and file, were more sympathetic to Gerry Adams and Sinn Féin. Both groups, however, were unified in their desire to make American immigration law far more sympathetic to Ireland and Irish America. Nothing succeeds like success. And the passing of the Morrison Visa in 1990 gave fresh impetus to Irish America to address the troubles. Sympathetic to the civil rights movement in the United States, which addressed and confronted the systematic discrimination of the country against its Black population, young Irish America would not ignore what it felt was the equal discrimination against the nationalist population in the North. African American officials, with the help of Irish American elected officials, called for the enactment of the Sullivan Principles, which required a boycott of South Africa to put pressure on that government to end discrimination against its native population. Those principles were widely adopted. Taking a leaf from that book, Irish America proposed the McBride Principles, aimed at addressing employment discrimination in the North. Despite either open hostility or profound indifference by both the Irish government and the SDLP, those principles were widely adopted in cities and states across the United States, making one more example of Irish American political success. That, of course, led to the presidential election of 1992. By 1992, Irish Americans were engaged as never before. What were the issues that led to this prolonged and effective engagement? I would suggest they were manifold. During the 1980s, the plight of Bobby Sands and the other hunger strikers caught the attention of Irish America. Their long and agonizing deaths were followed closely by the community. Margaret Thatcher's cruel response was well noted. Closer to home and within our very sight, Joe Doherty sat in a federal prison, waging a long, if ultimately unsuccessful, fight against extradition to Northern Ireland. In the midst of the troubles, we as Irish Americans were perplexed why the British government wasn't talking to the representatives of the nationalist community. As Americans, we were taught from childhood the basics of free speech embodied in the First Amendment of the Constitution. And we could not understand the rationale of the British government in banning Gerry Adams from the airwaves and the ultimate absurdity of having a BBC actor reading his very words. Irish America seized the opportunity presented by the 1992 election. Its leaders formulated a group of reasonable, achievable requirements for the Democratic candidates in the 1992 election. They included, one, a visa for Gerry Adams, who heretofore had been barred from the United States at the behest of the British government. Two, the appointment of a special peace envoy to Northern Ireland. And three, the support for the McBride Principles for equal employment. Irish America understood that that was their only hope, that the Bush administration, which was in power, bought into the British view of so-called special arrangements, and we would never get anywhere with that, with the Bush administration. On a Sunday evening, in April 1992, candidate Bill Clinton presented himself to an Irish-American presidential forum in Manhattan. He was fully briefed on the issues. He made straight for Paul O'Dwyer, by then a legend in his own community and beyond, and promised him that things were about to change and change forever. On that night, Bill Clinton pledged that as president, he would grant the visa to Gerry Adams, appoint a special envoy, and support fair employment practices. For those of us in the room that night, it was like Christmas, Thanksgiving, and our birthdays all rolled into one. But of course, Clinton had to win the presidency to be effective. Irish America mobilized and established Irish American for Clinton Gore. I was privileged to serve as its chair and traveled across the country from San Francisco to Boston, speaking to Irish American audiences. Our theme was simple. Bill Clinton was the only hope to relieve Northern Ireland of the burden of the Troubles. Election day dawned, and we saw a new man in the White House, William Jefferson Clinton, the man from hope. After the election, and in the ensuing days of the administration, the fight did not stop. Irish America was confronting decades of opposition from the Washington establishment, in particular the State Department, who argued for the special relationship above all else. I vividly remember going to the White House in early 1993 and being told by the staff there that Bill Clinton had decided, after all, not to grant the visa. I protested angrily and exited the White House, asking that I not be contacted again. Things changed very quickly thereafter. Apparently, there was only one person in the White House who believed that Bill Clinton's promises should be kept. That, of course, was Bill Clinton. I remember asking him many, many years later what led him to issue the visa in the opposition, the prolonged and vociferous opposition from his own State Department and the angry phone calls from John Major. Clinton replied that on balance, he felt in the end it was the right thing to do and the only way to break the stalemate that was besetting Northern Ireland. Shortly thereafter, the National Committee on American Foreign Policy, at the request of Americans Bill Flynn and your former Chancellor, Tom Moran, issued an invitation to Adams to speak at a conference. Adams arrived in New York, and thanks to the notoriety given to him by the British government, he was treated almost like a rock star. City, state, and national media covered his appearance. Adams' appearance in New York was crucial in convincing the nationalist population it was a new and more peaceful path forward to achieving a new Northern Ireland free of the systematic discrimination of the past. Bill Clinton fulfilled his other campaign promise and appointed the incredibly skillful George Mitchell as special envoy to the peace process. During those negotiations, painful concessions were made by all sides, and I don't have to tell this crowd about that. Irish in America also had to make painful decisions as to how and what they supported. In particular, it was incumbent on Irish America to let both traditions of Northern Ireland know that they were both equally valued. During that time, President Clinton was fully engaged in the process, spent many hours behind the scenes talking to the leaders. Similarly, our First Lady, Hillary Clinton, your present Chancellor, engaged the women of both traditions in Northern Ireland, seeking and ultimately receiving their commitment to peace. On Good Friday, 1998, both parties finally agreed what to all was a remarkable document. It recognizes the differing aspirations of both sides in the conflict, while also recognizing that the people of Northern Ireland have to live with their deepest differences. The Good Friday Agreement recognizes these differences, contrasting points of views, and divergent aspirations. But it also recognizes that people in Northern Ireland have far more in common than they have by way of differences, and all of that must be honored. Irish America was and is justly proud of its role in achieving the Good Friday Agreement. During the series of events that started with the granting of Gerry Adams' visa, Irish America was at each step supportive and helpful of all the parties seeking agreement. But of course, its major role was electing Bill Clinton and enlisting him in the peace process. Irish America, and indeed all of us, owed a great deal to Bill Clinton, and we set out to repay that debt. In September of 1998, at the White House, the Emerald Isle Immigration Center, of which I was president, conferred upon William Jefferson Clinton Paul O'Dwyer Peace and Justice Award. Let me, as a son, for a moment, explain to those in the audience the importance of Paul O'Dwyer to the Irish peace process. Paul O'Dwyer, who died 3 months prior to that award, was a legendary champion of the underdog during his lifetime. He fought housing discrimination in the 40s. He marched in Mississippi and Alabama for civil rights in the 60s. He was a leading voice against the war in Vietnam in the 70s and participated in the fight for gay and lesbian rights in the 80s and 90s. A proud son of County Mayo, his devotion to Ireland never wavered or diminished. It was this devotion that resulted in Paul O'Dwyer's commitment from his very first day in America to an Ireland where all people of all traditions, North and South, could enjoy the singular blessings of liberty that he so fervently embraced and fought for in his new land. Getting back, that day in September of 1998 was the low point of Bill Clinton's presidency. On that day, the infamous Starr report was issued. It explained excruciating, erotic, and explicit detail the activities of Bill Clinton and Monica Lewinsky in the White House. Most were wondering if the Clinton presidency could survive. The conferral of the award, which would normally be seen as routine, was covered by every major news organization and television camera, seeking signs that the presidency was wounded and that the people had lost faith in Bill Clinton. If they were seeking that, they were mightily disappointed. On that very warm, early September afternoon, 1988, I stood behind a podium on the South Lawn. As I delivered the speech conferring the award, on the front of the podium was a plaque, President of the United States. The president was close by. To his right was his wife, Hillary, and to his left, Senators George Mitchell, Edward Kennedy. In front of us, there was an invited audience of 400 Irish Americans who clapped, cheered, hooted, hollered their profound appreciation for the president and the peace that he brought. President Clinton received a standing ovation that lasted no less than 30 minutes. That crowd knew that the Clinton presidency was in jeopardy, and their job was to demonstrate that he still had the confidence of the people. Their prolonged, sustained, and enthusiastic applause received by the president and the first lady was ample proof that his presidency had not lost its luster among Irish Americans. President Clinton later told me on numerous occasions how grateful he was to the Irish America for showing up that day and giving him the enthusiastic reception that they did. He credited that day with saving his presidency. The Belfast Agreement, along with their common membership of the European, meant the end of the dreaded hard border between Northern Ireland and the Republic. And let me pause for a moment and explain to you what that border meant to Irish America. For those of us in those days that visited Dublin and came to Belfast, stopping at the border, the interrogation by the British governments and above all else, staring down the barrel of a gun was a traumatic experience that none of us would ever forget. In the eyes of the Irish America, the border was no mere economic separation, but a living symbol of political and social repression. We all rejoiced when the border disappeared, and the only visible sign of crossing the border was the pinging of the cell phone and the changing from kilometers to miles. In the years that followed, Irish America, unified as never before, celebrated success and continued its work in promoting the Good Friday Agreement. But the new and far more ominous challenge came like a storm cloud on a summer day. The Brexit referendum was held here in Northern Ireland as well as in England, Scotland, and Wales. The day before the referendum, then Taoiseach Edna Kenny, speaking not very far from here, warned of the hard border on the island of Ireland. We all know what followed. The overall UK vote came out 52 to 48, though the voters here in Northern Ireland voted 56 to 44 to remain. The British government mulled over the precise moment to pull the trigger on the actual departure. But Irish America viewed the referendum as an existential threat to the hard-won peace and one of its most symbolic results, an open border on the island of Ireland. It was time again for Irish America to mobilize, and indeed mobilize they did. For the first time, a prominent group of Irish Americans was formally organized around a single issue. In early 2019, a group of 40 Irish Americans from all political persuasion formed the ad hoc committee to protect the Good Friday Agreement, chaired by two former members of Congress, one Republican and one Democrat, Bruce Morrison and Jim Walsh, and directed by Kevin Sullivan, the group has brought together a widely divergent group of American leaders. Remarkably, many of its alumni are now in senior positions in the Biden administration, including Jake Sullivan, the National Security Advisor, John McCarthy, and Tom Wright. Since its founding, the committee has pursued an active agenda with key Irish, British, and American leaders. The committee includes 6 former ambassadors and 2 former special envoys. The committee work has been remarkably successful in focusing American attention on Brexit and the Good Friday Agreement. On another track, many, though certainly not all, felt that the best way to preserve the Good Friday Agreement was to elect Joe Biden, a proud son of Mayo and Louth, to the presidency. John McCarthy, a young Irish American, was recruited to the campaign to mobilize Irish American and Catholic voters. He in turn recruited a group of veteran Irish Americans to establish Irish Americans for Biden-Harris. Contained a significant Irish American community. Its job was to convince those Irish Americans who had voted for Donald Trump over Hillary Clinton to change their vote in support of Joe Biden. In 2 of those states, Pennsylvania and Michigan, the committee achieved real success, and Joe Biden carried those 2 states, assisting him in being elected president of the United States. To be fair, I need to stop here and point out Irish America's notable failure. During the peace process, many of us met regularly with representatives of both communities. Our message was clear, that the peace that ensued from an agreement would bring new prosperity to Northern Ireland, resulting from massive private investment by American corporations and public and private investment funds. In essence, that a rising tide would lift tall boats. Unfortunately, we've not delivered on that promise, although we have started the process by convincing New York State Controller Tom DiNapoli to make good sound investments in Northern Ireland using New York State pension funds. Irish America needs to build on its success here. Just as we used our political power to leverage the economic power of our investment funds to promote via the McBride Principles equal employment opportunity, we must now use that power to promote employment opportunities for all traditions over the North. Of course, the present political climate, coupled with the uncertainty of Brexit, makes that impractical at the moment. But I envision the day when Irish America will once again embark on a campaign to spur American investment in the North. I, for one, consider it my duty to be part of that campaign. So where do we stand now? I would submit that never in our nation's history has the voice of Irish America been so strong. For most of its history, the United States government has been indifferent when it came to meeting the desires and an aspiration of Irish America when it came to their ancestral home frame. Even during the Troubles, foreign policy establishment valued the special relationship with Great Britain to a far greater extent than they responded to Irish America. Indeed, during the early days of the Trouble, President Richard Nixon's Secretary of State, William Rogers, described Ted Kennedy's suggestion that the United States, as it act as a mediator, as outrageous. The sleeping giant has awoken. So it was not really Irish America that was asleep, but the entire American foreign policy establishment. Today, Irish America is no longer looking out and looking in. For the first time, both official America and the Irish America have converged on a common goal, the preservation of the Good Friday Agreement. If the Good Friday Agreement, the peace and political process, is seen as being threatened, those who present that threat must answer much more to just us in Irish America. They now must answer to American President Joe Biden, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, and Senate Majority Leader Charles Schumer. In 2019, when I was chosen as Grand Marshal of the New York St. Patrick's Day Parade, I used the occasion to warn Great Britain that Irish America would not stand idly by and see the gains of the Good Friday Agreement abrogated. In particular, I warned Great Britain that the coveted post-Brexit trade agreement between the United States and Great Britain would never get past the Senate or House of Representatives of the United States unless and until the Good Friday Agreement was honored in all its aspects. Now, in June 2022, that warning has become a reality. Today, the trade agreement is under the watchful eye of Congressman Richie Neal, the second most powerful person in the United States House of Representatives. And the new reality is that the Good Friday Agreement and all of Northern Ireland is a concern for official Washington. For many in Congress, Northern Ireland is that rare thing on Capitol Hill, where partisan agreement and action is not just possible, but in fact, a prevailing fact. There is no going back. Ireland's exiled children in America are ready as never before to stand with our cousins of both traditions to enhance peace and prosperity in this land of our forefathers and mothers. You know, it seems from the beginning of time that Irish Americans, speakers, have always been required to conclude their remarks with those of a poet. In this land of poets, I dare not veer from that tradition. But I will diverge from my brothers and sisters by not quoting Yeats, and here not quoting Heaney, but Anthony Rafferty, the 19th century poet from my ancestral Mayo. Rafferty once wrote, "I am Rafferty, the poet full of hope and love. Behold me now, with my back to the wall, playing music to empty pockets. You, this Belfast audience, have been far kinder than the audience Rafferty spoke to in Kilshabat. I thank you for that, and I'm most especially grateful for the faculty of Queens for this most kind invitation. Good night. May joy be with you all."
Brian, thank you so much for that wide-ranging and personal lecture, covering so much ground. I'm sure there are many questions. Brian is happy to answer questions on any of the aspects that he's spoken about today. We have a couple of roving mics operated by our postgraduates, Miley and Melissa. So if you'd like to ask a question, just raise your hand and the mic will come to you. Is anyone who would like to start? It's up at the back there.
First of all, thank you very much for a very stimulating and far-reaching lecture. Touched on a lot of extremely pertinent material that's so relevant today. One thing which intrigues me when we talk about the concept of Irish America is just what exactly that ethos embraces and who it embraces. I note with interest your careful mention of the participation in the War of Independence, Civil War, the other conflicts of Irish immigrants who fought on behalf of freedom, justice, truth, right, freedom of speech, and so on. And amongst those were peppered, if not represented very strongly, a very strong group of Presbyterians who had left Ireland's shores, having been repressed here, inspired by the French Revolution and the men of '98 and so on, and brought that spirit and contributed to development of the United States. And indeed, some of them went on to achieve high office, including many of them became president. And I'm just wondering, whenever those from the unionist side of the community watch with interest Irish America's interest in what's going on here at the moment, whether or not the views of those people, which may still be inculcated in a lot of thinking here, have been abandoned or overlooked, because they too have an expectation that freedom, religion, laws, and individuality will be respected. And I just wonder to what extent that is embraced in the commendable and wholesome aspiration of the ethos of American Irish America, as it were. Thank you.
I think that you bring up a very fair point, and I've made, of course, my first point that I made was that the existence of the Presbyterians that were in Washington's army and fought very hard for America civil rights in the Revolution, and that's really an important thing to notice, because for many reasons on both sides, that history has been shamefully eradicated. I think one of the differences between people of my generation on the whole versus the previous generations of Irish American, and certainly people after me, is that an idea that we cannot have peace, prosperity, we cannot do things without respecting the aspirations of both sides. And I understand, I think we all understand that these are difficult times for everybody, and particularly for unionists. And yet, for example, I have never come to Belfast, and I've led a number of delegations without going both to the Falls and the Shankill, because these are traditions that need to be respected and need to be addressed. And I think one of the problems that many of the unionists feel is that Irish America does not respect them, does not feel, does not have their traditions in mind. And I think that's work that we still have. That's work we still have. That's cut out for us to do that, because we don't serve the purposes that we want to serve without making sure that all sides feel comfortable in what's going forward.
Yes, Liam.
Thank you very much. It was a wonderful overview. And I think preserving the Good Friday Agreement, the objective you mentioned for Irish America, is a really important one. But I just wonder, some would argue that Good Friday Agreement, almost a quarter century on, is in need of reform, but it has to some degree institutionalized sectarianism here at the level of the power structure. So I wonder, might there be a case for expanding the agenda that you sketched for Irish America to a reform of the Good Friday Agreement rather than sacralizing it?
I think what you say is correct, and I think a lot of people, particularly in the present situation, are are wondering whether we need to look at the Good Friday Agreement again. I would suggest to you that this is not the time for it, right? With the Good Friday Agreement under the attack that it is, particularly Brexit, that our first, certainly my first view, first priority is to make sure that it's preserved. Down the road, I think all parties can get together and say, sure, it's 25 years old, things have changed, like everything else. But I think that given this present situation, now is not the time for us to be thinking about that.
Other questions? Yes, over here, Sean.
That was a wonderful insider's account of plans. One of the points you made was importance of the Clinton administration reaching out to unionists as well as nationalists and supported a late night final form of President Johnson to Trimble was crucial. But I'm going back to what you said earlier about the different unionists as the nationalist population. One of the problems we have here is the legacy of Brexit. What Brexit has left us with is a sort of surly xenophobia, both the Tory party and the largest faction of nationalism. A deep suspicion of outside forces, whether they're the EU or the United States. And against that background, is it ever really going to be possible for Irish Americans to have any sort of meaningful relationship with the Ulster Protestant Unionist community?
I think there's going to be, I think you're absolutely right. There's going to be a section of that unionist population that will never, ever accept what I consider our good faith in terms of being for cherishing both sides. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't reach out, and we have. Talking about reaching out, I just remember my first days at the St. Patrick's Day at the White House, where the unionist politicians were sat on one end of the room and the nationalists on the other end of the room, and Bill Clinton made them all come together, and God forbid that there would be a photograph in that room for what they had to say.
Question at the front.
My name is John Theorick. My parents were immigrants from County Mayo, like Brian's. I've been in law reform in the United States for the past 60 years as a lawyer. I've spent my first few years of crafting with members of Congress and other lawyers, the 25th Amendment to the United States Constitution. I had the honor, like Brian, to serve on President Clinton's maiden trip to Belfast. I recall John Hume on a visit to Fordham Law School, where I was a dean, encouraging us as a school to come to Northern Ireland. I had the opportunity to discuss with Queen's Law School and University College Dublin Law School, putting together a summer law program where law students from America would come here and come to appreciate the rich culture in both parts of Ireland. And we've been doing so for the past 21 years. I'm a member of the Good Friday, Ad hoc Good Friday Committee, as is my colleague, Professor Martin, director of our program. I studied the Good Friday Agreement and its history, and what it has, and I've taught American law students concerning the Good Friday Agreement, and they have studied the Good Friday Agreement. The one theme I draw from the Good Friday Agreement is that there's a shared future there, and it's very important that people of all traditions, or no tradition, might be in that category, to sometimes call the other category, should in appropriate ways come together and proceed with the implementation of the agreement. And as we had to do with the American Constitution, it was not perfect. Within the first 15 years, we had 2 significant amendments to the American Constitution. And I must say, from where I come, and I've listened to over 600 or 700 students who've been part of our program at Fordham here in Belfast and Dublin. We have so much appreciation for people here, and many people here of culture traditions. And I for myself, think, as was said in what I consider a very inspiring address today, an opportunity right now to build on Magna Carta, in terms of everyone's equal in the space that with respect to Magna Carta right here. It's a sense of togetherness in the healthcare system. Shouldn't society grab hold of this time and start building a shared future together? I'm not dealing with the political arrangements. I'm just looking at the coming together. I have a lot of friends in America. When I came here under President, the message that came back to me, President and Secretary of Commerce at the time, was make a contribution in helping develop a peaceful society, prosperous society. So many of us in America want to make that possible, work with you, that possible. And that's really what I want to say here. I'm 85 years of age. I'm still in the classroom. I'm still working on it. I found out that remember the Pipes Trust Group contributed here in Northern Ireland to public housing. I recently received a award from Carmel Abbey for contributions in that part of the island. Recipient of Belfast Ambassadors went back in 2016. I love this country. This is where my parents were born. I understand why we can't push ahead now. Make aspirations of the Good Friday Agreement a reality, and not get bogged down in the Friday Agreement. I don't see that at all, but I do see the opportunity to affect it, build on it, so many different ways. And America, I see things here to help you.
Like John, you've been an inspiration to most young Irish Americans for many, many years. Thank you for all you've done. Question at the bottom.
Brad, here for your keen follow. It's great. We have lots of visitors from New York, but to have 2 Mayo men here, you and John Ferrick, it's quite the occasion. Just before I ask a question, John Ferrick is the man who effectively wrote the 25th Amendment to the US Constitution, which allows the removal of a president on grounds of mental disability, which was in the news. Amazingly, it was in the news a few years ago. So John Ferrick's always very welcome. Brad, I want to just return to a question this gentleman asked, because I don't know if you really caught it completely, because as I understand it, what this gentleman was asking is about the breadth of Irish America and how to include those from a Presbyterian tradition. Of course, were the first Irish who went to New York were Presbyterians right back in the start of the 17th century. In recent years, we've seen Irish America expand in terms of diversity. Thank God we started out the St. Patrick's Day Parade in New York in terms of LGBT groups being able to take part. We now have an African American Irish diaspora network. But is it possible that perhaps in Irish America would also get a group which focuses on the Presbyterian, what they call Scots Irish, what sometimes we call Ulster Scots? Because that is still a missing part of the jigsaw. We had 1.7 million visitors from the US to the island of Ireland in 2019 before COVID. And yet we still fail, in my view, to sell the Ulster in particular to that Scots-Irish or Ulster-Scots. So is there anyone out there, because, you know, sometimes I go to Irish American events and after a certain time at night they turn into Irish Catholic events, Irish American Catholic events, which is understandable, but I still think that that's the missing part, which would be very useful if there was a group that was as progressive as you are on these issues of practical Good Friday Agreement, but said we actually represent that tradition in America. So my question to you is there any evidence that that may come about?
You bring up a very good point, Marcin. There frankly has not been enough outreach by our groups to that, and there are any number of groups that would be sympathetic, and I think it's an important issue that we have to face. We particularly have to face the fact that as I stated, I mean, Northern Ireland is seen by many as a Democratic and not a Republican issue. We've been able to make that bipartisan with Mick Maloney, Mick and the others, but I think there is a need for us to reach out, and we haven't done it. You're absolutely right.
Yes, question.
Hiya. So you mentioned Bill Clinton and other various political administrations, but I have a question about the average Irish American. Do you think these days the average Irish American is interested in Irish politics and Irish society in modern Ireland, or do you think there's a distinct identity that relates more to Ireland in a historical sense, in a romantic sense, really to an Ireland that doesn't exist anymore?
Let me try and be polite on this answer. All right. There is a certain amount of people in this island who deprecate Irish America. That have, if we have a viewpoint of Ireland, some of which is right or wrong. Their viewpoint is that all of us are right-wing Republicans that guzzle beer every single night, get drunk, and sing Mother McCree or Who Put the Overall in Mrs. Murphy's Chowder. Right? The reality is, of course, there are people like that. I wish there weren't, but there are. But there are 40 million people who have taken the time in the American census to identify themselves as Irish Americans. All right. Now, many of those are indifferent, of course, like anything else. Many of them, ascribe to what, this mythology of the certain Irish elite ascribe. But there is a significant portion of Irish America that is engaged and has been engaged, for the last 50 years, and certainly since the Clinton administration. And that Irish America is not right-wing, not crazy, not bigots. They are activist people who believe in the American government, in the Bill of Rights of the United States Constitution, and feel that the people of Ireland are entitled to every one of those rights, and have fought, as I indicated. If I fought and if I walked on the picket lines in Mississippi and in the rallies in Washington against the war, why would I not want the land of my fathers to have those same rights? And that's where Irish America comes in. Yeah. Are there? Of course, I can't. In 40 million people, you're going to find people that are bigots, that forgot where they came from, that forgot their parents are immigrants, or their grandparents were immigrants, and now discriminate against those people that are just the same looking for just the same thing as my father and grandmother did. But there are also Irish Americans who are out there on the lines who care greatly about discrimination, again, of human rights. And just as they care about it in the United States, they care about it here. And, there's, painting us as beer-guzzling bigots does a disservice not only to Irish America, but to this country.
Yes, Peter?
Hi, thanks very much. I wanted to ask to say a little bit more about bipartisanship in the US. Like you touched on a little bit there in the previous question at the end of your talk. And obviously a lot of emphasis was made on Clinton, but my understanding is Reagan even was very important in the Anglo-Irish agreements. It was Tip O'Neill pressing, but even the Bush administration, the second Bush administration, deserves a lot of credit for implementing and stabilising the Good Friday Agreement. And the delegation that came last week, as I understand it, was again bipartisan. So maybe just to say a little bit more about how important that is for you now, even looking beyond kind of post-Gordon, and how, because it seems to me that's really central to what's been achieved is not just the Clinton administration, but various administrations. Thank you.
I think you're absolutely right. I did mention that in my speech that the issue is bipartisan on the Capitol Hill, and God knows there's very few bipartisan issues on Capitol Hill these days. And I probably should have mentioned the Bush administration really was engaged, and the second Bush administration was needed to be given a lot of credit for that. In fact, even the Trump administration had, despite everything we know about it, had some glimmers of hope in terms of Northern Ireland. But I think we can rely, frankly, on the congressional members who were over here before, and there's a number of them that are Republicans, and even in my own state, that have been very sympathetic to the issues in Northern Ireland, and it is important. We're facing a new Congress coming up. The chances are, among others, that it may change. So it's important that we keep, a bipartisan viewpoint on it. Point well taken. That's the question.
Question, I'd like to do that. Is it my turn?
Yes.
With respect to the labour movement and the Irish American role in that, which has been a big part of your life as well, but part of that sleeping giant, it was the modern economy, both here on this island and in the US. A big victory in Staten Island recently on Amazon. Some Irish Americans involved in that on the economic justice side, but this big plant in Dublin at Amazon too, I'm sure, in terms of bringing people together on this island on issues of common concern, labor rights and employment justice issues. I think maybe another part of that, but I know that's dear to your heart as well in terms of that potential.
It is, and I didn't touch on that, Frank, but you're absolutely right. The labor movement, in particular, in terms of their political viewpoint, was very, very prominent during the getting Bill Clinton elected, but also very important in terms of when John and I were over with Bill Clinton. There were a number of labor leaders that joined us on that trip. They were very, very, very involved in the peace process as it went on, and in being supportive, and continue to be. A number of them are on the ad hoc committee. Gentleman over there.
Hello, my name is Harry McCarthy, for what it's worth. A frontline community worker, now 80 years of age, retired. And what I want to say was that
We never retire, Harry, I tell you.
I never retire. That's why I'm here, so it's fine to hear you especially. Once you're involved in this kind of thing, it never really stops. But I found your lecture very interesting. I want to congratulate you on. I found it really educational. Okay. At the moment, as you know, Brexit is very much a focus in Westminster, and they seem to have a lot of obsession with it. My concern is that I have been observing as a Belfast citizen, as a former frontline community worker during the Troubles here, that a lot of the Good Friday Agreement and so forth seems to have been hollowed out. A lot of its principles that were written into it were to be, East-West contact. All these other aspects of it should have been developed and worked, and to some extent have been neglected for 20 years. In parallel with that, we've had the density of lying in society, which is the poison that feeds into all societies which are not handled carefully. Witness what happened in Trump's America, witness what's happening in Russia at the moment over so-called military missions to rescue the poor people of Ukraine and destroy their cities. And I'm saying that certainly in terms of Belfast, unless there are people like yourselves who also contributed to some kind of resolution and peace in this country, unless that is definitely reinforced very strongly by the American administration, we will end up again with another bloodbath lasting for 40 years in Northern Ireland. And it doesn't need to be that way. I'm not trying to teach you or say anything to you that's original, but I can tell you as someone who was intimately involved with it here. One of the great problems that modern societies face, whether it's Britain, America, or Russia, or the Ukraine, is the nature of communication, and the role of propaganda in those societies contributes powerfully, right, to poisoning people's minds. So they're not then open to visitors from other countries like yourselves coming and saying, well, let's get the Protestants and Catholics together. Let's defuse a lot of these traditional enmities. Let's look at the reality of what the true history of this country was in days that has been completely warped and distorted by people of evil intent. So that's my observation, motivated by your talk.
Well, I think, obviously that type of behavior doesn't stop here. It certainly goes across the pond. But I think I'm myself a student of history, and this book, which I all recommend to you, by the way, which is Washington and the Irish by Neil O'Dowd, opened my eyes for the first time as to the role, particularly of Irish Presbyterians in Washington's army and their work in terms of the American independence. That was obliterated. Talk about that. That was obliterated by various constituencies that did not want that known. And it's only when history is when the light of truth is on history that we see things like that are really important.
Okay, I think we can take one or two more questions. We have one over here. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Mr. O'Dwyer, for a very inspiring lecture. My name is Ghassan Abu Alfa. I'm a medical doctor, what we call in Ireland a consultant. I work at Sloan Kettering in New York, and at night I go to school and I'm a student of Professor Frick and Professor Martin. And in response to what we just heard about what's the contribution of the Irish American to make it spicier, I'm originally from Beirut, Lebanon, and my wife is from Dublin, Ireland. And what we proudly did together to make sure that we pay to what I lived as events and what my wife lived as troubles, we started a program in Trinity College Dublin called Medical Diplomacy. And we supported, add to it, we actually exchanged students in medicine between the American University of Beirut, where I graduated from, and Trinity every year for them to learn the two cultures and the troubles that we went through on both days. And I would say that despite all what we understand in regard to the peace accord and what's needed to be done still, I think the Irish should be very proud of what they have done so far. And if anything, maybe it's time to start teaching other opportunities like Lebanon and other troubled areas. So this way it can enhance further the peace accord. At the same time, hopefully we'll get to some other opportunities in other parts of the world.
Thank you. I think that's being done. And first of all, thank you for your service at Sloan Kettering. There's thousands, maybe millions of New Yorkers that have benefited from the cancer cures that you would put forth. So talking about doing God's work, you're doing it every day. Even if you're showing up to be, why you want to go to a law school, I don't know, but that's another question. But there are a number of programs, and Bill and Hillary have I know, very much part of this, to use the example of what we went through in Northern Ireland and what the people of Northern Ireland, not what we went through, but people in Northern Ireland, into, you know, and of course it's not perfect, but it is peace. There are a lot of other areas in the world that could use this example.
Yes, the last question.
Yeah. Thanks very much, Adrian Gilkey. I wanted to thank you very much for mentioning the importance of the border in your talk and the importance of the change in the border that came about as a result of the process to create the open border we now have between the two parts of Ireland. Because really, I think in a way, that's what Brexit most of all threatens, is that open border between the two parts of Ireland. Because getting into the issue around the Good Friday Agreement can get quite complicated, because there are people who want to reform the Good Friday Agreement quite legitimately, and there are also people who argue that somehow or other the protocol interferes with the Good Friday Agreement. So we get into a bit of a muddle over the Good Friday Agreement, whereas the open border is something that everybody can understand and defend and needs to be defended against the consequences of a hard Brexit. I think I really appreciated you making the point about how great it was to have an open border between the two parts of Ireland. Thank you.
Yeah, I try to talk about it, but I don't think you can emphasize it enough. Okay, particularly for, you know, pre 9/11. Unfortunately, things have changed in American society. We were not used to seeing people with guns on the street, or with, you know, soldiers on the street. So when we came over to Northern Ireland, I remember my own thing of it. I was going from Dublin to Donegal. I was delivering a lecture up there. I was by myself in the car, and I was stopped. And there was this 18-year-old kid with a gun pointing straight at me, and it was obviously he was scared. He was probably more scared than I was, and I was pretty scared. And to watch that, and then know that what I went through, people who lived here went through every single day, was terrifying. And so when people like me who are in Irish America talk about the border, it's visceral. It is emotive. It is not an economic thing. It is real. We felt it, and we never want to feel it again. And that's why I think people underestimate two things. And I'll conclude with this. People underestimate in Irish America two things. One is the question of the border. And two is the pride we felt in helping get the Good Friday Agreement. And in both instances, these are not just economic or intellectual. These are real issues that we are gut-wrenching and which we care very much about. So, you know, I hope that I was able to give you that sense that somehow many on the other side can't figure out, particularly Mr. Johnson and his cohorts.
Brian, we can hear the the backing group kind of tuning up elsewhere. So that either means that you're going to have to answer any further questions through song, or that it's time to adjourn and to move on to the next stage of the evening. We invited Brian to come and speak back in 2019.
Yes.
I'm sure you'll agree with me that it was worth waiting until we could have Brian here in person to share his unique experiences and perspectives on Irish America and on Irish America's engagement with the peace process here in Northern Ireland. I think it's been a fantastic event. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Peter.
For coming.
Thank you all.